A word of warning, this podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes some strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing.
Hello and welcome to the Sidebar, presented by True Crime News, taking you inside the courtrooms of high-profile and notorious cases from across the country. I'm your host, Joshua Ritter. I'm a criminal defense lawyer based in Los Angeles and previously a Los Angeles County prosecutor for nearly a decade. You can find me on all social media at Joshua Ritter ESQ or at joshuaritter.com. We are recording this on Tuesday, July 8th, 2025. In this week's episode, convictions in the case of a slain mother of 5 a decade after her disappearance, as well as the future of Sean Diddy Combs after the mogul avoids convictions on the most serious charges in his federal sex trafficking trial. But first, Bryan Kohberger avoiding the death penalty after pleading guilty to the University of Idaho murders that shocked the nation. Today, we are very happy to be joined by Jack Rice, an attorney, educator, and legal analyst you can catch on multiple outlets. Jack, welcome back, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing just great. Great to be with you.
Oh, I always look forward to this. You're a fan favorite. You're a favorite of mine. I always appreciate your insights. And these are some big cases. We have some updates on cases that we've been following literally for years this week. Wow. So I'm really curious to hear your thoughts, especially on this first one. Let's just jump in. Out of Moscow, Idaho, in a shocking turn of events, Bryan Kohberger has admitted to the murder of 4 college students to avoid the death penalty. Kohberger, a former criminology student, pled guilty to 1 count of burglary along with 4 counts of first-degree murder. These charges reflect the deaths of Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, who were fatally stabbed in their off-campus home in November of 2022. Some of the victims' family members were pleased with the outcome, sparing them a trial with gruesome details of the killings on public display. However, other family members felt that Kohberger circumvented justice in the plea, claiming that the state had, quote, made a deal with the devil. While Kohberger will be sentenced on July 23rd, many questions about the case remain unanswered, with no further discoveries to come from presenting the case to a jury. And that is kind of my first question, Jack. What do you think about this? Jump in. Give me, first of all, your reaction, and then the idea that will we ever get any answers here?
I'm shocked Kohberger flipped. I mean, I really am. I mean, in the sense of everything else, I mean, we can work our way through what that means. But the one thing that shocks me is that Kohberger flipped. If we look at sort of his general demeanor, his general approach, how he seemed to be handling all of this, my perception is that he was leaning in. He seemed to almost enjoy it. And so under those circumstances, there's a very small window when you're going to be at the epicenter of the criminal world, if you will. And if you go to trial and you lose, you drop into the proverbial black hole and nobody sees you again per se. Well, that's the worst of all worlds for somebody who wants to be the bright shining star at the center. And my perception is that's what he wanted to be. So the fact that he flipped on this is somewhat shocking.
You know, I agree with you, and that's you're saying it in a way I hadn't really thought about. You and I have been doing this long enough. We can kind of sniff out the guys who are desperate and the people who are really afraid and the people who are going to do anything it takes to avoid the death chamber.
Right.
I didn't get that impression from him. I didn't, and I know we didn't hear actually much from him, but both in his demeanor and through his defense, it seemed like he's willing to play this game of chicken. And you're right, it just is surprising to me that at the final moment, he doesn't want to have that last, whatever you want to call it, his final chapter, his final opus in court to have all of this play out in front of everyone. Do you think it was really a fear of the death penalty that got him more than anything else?
Yeah. I think in the end, there is that piece of this. Do you think that this is something that's spun out? See, that's going to be an interesting question, is the behind the scenes. What really happened, fulfilling this, creating this 3-dimensional who done it and how done it kind of a thing. I don't know if you're ever going to get that answer regardless. I mean, there's a lot to where everybody is on this, but sometimes there are so many answers that will remain ethereal. They will slip through your fingers like sand, and no matter how closely you try to push your fingers together, it still slides through. So I think that's going to be a big piece of this. But, Josh, as I think about this case, and you and I talked about this more than once, and it's because this case went on for so long. The thing about this case to me is there's an aspect of this case, as I think about this, that feels oddly universal. And what I mean by universal is this, is not long after this happened, I took my youngest daughter to college. And we went through this orientation process. And believe it, this is relevant. I know it feels like I'm going far afield, but just follow me for a sec. And it's this, is I'm sitting in this room and my daughter's there and all of these other parents from all over the country are there, Los Angeles, by the way. And then they separate the kids out and they take them all somewhere else and it's just the parents. And we're sitting in this room. And I look around at all of these parents, and I look around at sort of, you can feel the hope and the belief and the prayers that are poured into these little vessels that you're sending out into the world, and that's what people do year after year after year, decade after decade, and they have for centuries. And this is what we do as parents. If you look at the Kohberger case, this is that. This is the monster who steps in and creates the theft of what we all pour our life's prayers into. We have these 4 young people, 4 families who sent their kids to college with every hope that they could do something magical, because that's what we all hope for. And that this stranger, and I'll use that term, stranger, breaks into a house and steals 4 of them. And it appears or feels random. And it's that random nature of it that to me makes it the universal aspect of the theft that was taken and could have been any of us, any of those parents, including me in that room or rooms across the country, who all felt the way that these families had to feel, that thankfully we did not. And when I see this case, I think about it in that context and how those families feel today, because it could have been any of us.
You just gave me chills talking about it the way that you did, because I think you're absolutely right. If we oftentimes there are cases that capture the entire attention of the country, and you can figure that out. It's involving a celebrity, it's involving some sports figure. In a case like this, you go, well, listen, there was an incredible loss of life, but really it's what you described. It's that nightmare. This is the secret nightmare that lives in a very dark corner of every parent's mind. Right. Something horrific like this may happen if they allow their kids to go out into the world. And for these parents, these 4 sets of families to have suffered that kind of loss is what I think really captured everyone's attention. Right. You say that we may never know what changed in Kohberger's mind. And I agree with you. They're probably never going to say what it was. I think that they had recently suffered some losses in defenses they were trying to mount. That, in my view, might have been what pushed them over the edge. But how about the prosecutors? Many people are saying, for the reasons you just outlined so eloquently, if we're going to have a death penalty, if that's going to be on the books, then of all the cases I've heard in recent memory, it should be reserved for a case like this. Why do you feel they stepped off of that? What benefit did they get? Do you understand this, or is it something that you just fail to even comprehend?
Now, you were a prosecutor too, right? At one time. And as a prosecutor, sometimes we're weighing things that other people aren't weighing. And I get the outrage from people who don't do what we do, who don't see what we see. And I get it. And explaining it how I just tried to explain it, I was trying to make the point that I get the visceral nature of this, where I know what can fix this. Give me 2 minutes in a room with this guy by myself. Just give me 2 minutes. And with where I come from and what I know how to do, that would be long enough. I could take care of this easy. The thing is that as prosecutors, one of the things that we're always calculating is certainty. We're always looking at exposure. As defense attorneys, we're always looking at exposure. As you and I were discussing before we even started today on something else, we're always looking at that because that helps shape how we move forward. But as prosecutors, the thing is that trying a case is never certain, ever. Because sometimes what good defense attorneys need to do is they can sit back and say, just wait for them to screw up. And we do that. And I've done that. And I've frankly done it successfully. But it's more than that. In cases like these, and this is an extraordinarily complex case, there are multifaceted ways in which the state can screw up. And I mean it on the pre-charge, pre-trial admission stage, even with judge rulings. Because I always say there's always two fights in a trial. The pre-trial fight and then the trial fight. Then there's technically the post-trial fight, if you really will. Because what can happen is, what happens if we go down this path and he goes to trial and loses? Well, now my thought is, I know how desperate these police officers were, and how desperate this police chief was, and how desperate these prosecutors were when they couldn't figure out who to charge, or they didn't know how to charge this case yet. We all remember the town was going nuts. The question is, what did all of those officers do? Did they do everything they were supposed to do correctly? That's one question. But let's look at all the other aspects of this. As they followed him across the country, as they went into Pennsylvania to his father's house, and they figured out, oh, let's take a look at some DNA that he leaves in a trash tied to a piece of pizza or something. And then we take that DNA and we start to work it and morph it down in Texas in a lab to see if we can come up with mitochondrial DNA, to see if we can find a way to work backward to make sure we can link it to a sheath that was found at the crime scene. Well, I just gave you 3 different things that are potentially open to an appeal. Now, we haven't even talked about all of those rulings that came in as well. Every single one of those has the potential to flip this case back into the trial court. Now, all of a sudden, you have the possibility that this case may not be done when you think it's done. And that assumes you get all the convictions you think you're going to get. Now, put that on one part of the scale versus a part that says, you will never see daylight, guaranteed. I like this one if I'm a prosecutor, where I can say, there are aspects of this case that maybe nobody really understands like we know, and it's not as good as it appears to be, because let's face it, a criminal complaint is the best a prosecutor ever has in a trial, because once you put them on the stand, things start to get a little odd, and that can happen. The certainty of a conviction has real appeal because it avoids all of the potential appellate issues that the defense has at their disposal over the next 15 to 20 years.
Yeah. I agree with you. It's something that people, I think, are having a tough time struggling with, because it doesn't satisfy their immediate desire for justice and answers and everything else. But when you realize how you avoided decades of this continuing to haunt the lives of those victims' families, and decades of the chance that it may get turned around, and avoid all of that, and he is gone forever and they can wipe their hands of it, that is something that is worth what they offered. A lot of people may not agree with that, but I agree with you in your assessment of it.
Well, there's more to this, though. There's more to this, though, if I might. And that's this, is that, one of the questions, and I know you and I deal with this all the time. I mean, here's what I love about you, is in particular, the difference between you and a lot of people who are out there in this realm. They're not in the trenches. They sit back on the bleachers and they talk about this from afar. You and I are actually in the trenches dealing with what's going on right now. I'm sitting in my office and my paralegal is within 15 feet of me, and we got stuff going. Yeah. And the thing is that one of the aspects of this is we're dealing with how the world actually works rather than how we want it to work. And one of the things that I think about in every case that has a victim, and it's not just an arbitrary victim or the state's a victim or there's some statistical victim or there's a potential, I mean real victims. There's always the question of how much authority should a victim have when it comes to trials and when it comes to convictions. Because one of the things that I think we should be thinking about and talking about is the idea that the state, the federal government, the Commonwealth, whoever is actually doing the prosecution, they don't represent the victims. They represent the people. They represent the Commonwealth. They represent the collective. And the question is always, how much authority should the victims have in a case like this? And there's a lot of laws in place federally and across the United States about that issue, about they have the right to have their voices heard. And by the way, I believe it's absolutely 100% critical because it should absolutely impact the outcome of cases. However, they shouldn't, in my opinion, control the outcome of a case. Because I can tell you now, I know people who would argue you get a simple domestic assault, that person should be put to death. Right. You're going to get that. You're going to have people who are going to say, I lost an arm, you should lose an arm. Literally, you're going to get that. And this eye for an eye is out there amongst some. And I'm not even saying right or wrong. I'm saying that we have to be able to collectively recognize the impact and power of victims and their right to speak and their right to impact the process. But we also have to recognize the limitation that those victims have on the process itself. Thoughts?
No, extremely well put. And it's a case that I'm sure people will be debating for a very long time because for all the reasons we pointed out, it is something that seems to have struck at the core of our collective consciousness. Yeah. But it will be back by the end of this month, July 23rd, for sentencing. So we will, of course, keep you all updated. Let's move to Bowling Green, Kentucky, where another case reached its conclusion as two men were convicted for the murders of a Kentucky woman named Crystal Rogers. Brooks Houck was convicted on a charge of murder and tampering with evidence, while conspirator Joseph Lawson was also convicted on the tampering charge, along with the conspiracy to commit murder charge in Rogers' slaying and the subsequent cover-up. Rogers, a mother of 5, was last seen in July of 2015. At the time of her disappearance, she was living with her boyfriend, Houck, who is believed to be the last person to see the mother alive. Houck took Rogers on a quote-unquote special date to his family's farm, from which she never returned, and her body was never found. Without the woman's remains, the prosecution's case was circumstantial, relying on cell phone data and Houck's contradictory statements to police in the wake of Rogers' disappearance. Houck's defense has discredited the prosecution's case as a convoluted mess, while Lawson's team has downplayed any involvement in the alleged killing. Ultimately, jurors sided with the state, who theorized that Houck had masterminded the woman's killing, potentially with the help of other family members. Meanwhile, Lawson aided Houck by moving Rogers' car from the scene of her demise after the disappearance. Jurors recommended the maximum sentence for both men, with final sentencing scheduled for August 21st. This case was a tough one from a prosecutor's perspective, Jack. We're talking about a lack of physical evidence, no DNA evidence. You've got no body, and you've got a cold case. I mean, put that all together, that's about as difficult as it gets for a prosecutor. What do you think convinced jurors here? What was the stuff that finally was the thing that moved the needle for them, do you think?
Circumstantial evidence is still evidence. It is. There's no body. Yeah, that's a problem. There's no DNA. Yeah, that's a problem too. But here's what came in that trial that I think drove this jury. This was a mom of 5 who would never have left her kids.
No.
Ever. Ever. This would never have happened unless somebody had murdered her. And I think that's what the jury thought, very simply. And they thought that this special night, this special dinner, was him killing her. The idea that there was enough evidence that said, yeah, he got the help of Lawson, and his dad came in and said, yeah, he called me and I went and I picked him up. All of those were aspects of this case that helped support the concept that said he didn't do this by himself. He had somebody else help him do this. And he was the one who saw her last because he's the one who took her for this special night, and she was never seen again. You add all of those pieces up. Is the prosecution's case a mess? Yes. Yes, it is. There's holes in it all over the place. However, because you can make the argument, how do we know she's dead? Except for we know what? She's a mother of 5. She would never have left her kids unless somebody had killed her. Circumstantial evidence is still evidence, and circumstantial evidence can convince a jury that who else but, and that's really how they argued this, who else but this guy is the guy who killed her.
I'm so glad you said that. A mentor of mine was a prosecutor here in Los Angeles named John Lewin. You may have heard him. He did the Robert Blake case. He was, he's big time cold case prosecutor, really into the cases where it's exactly like this. No body, 10 years old, very little forensic evidence, and very highly circumstantial. And he said it, he would always say it exactly how you said it. It's not a question so much of did the defendant do it, but who else could have done it? And when you give that question to jurors and they start to go, well, yeah, that's got to be the answer because no one else then could be responsible for this person's disappearance.
Yeah, and I hate it. I hate it. As a defense attorney, I hate it. Right. But it's true, because what you do is you say, who else but this guy? But if you actually talk about what that means, when you say who else but he could have done this, you know what you've just done? You've shifted the burden.
Yeah.
That's right. Damn right. That's exactly what you do. And you turn around and say, who but him did this? And my response is, that's not the question. Right. That is not the legal question. And I would object to you laying it out like that, because in fact, the question is prove that he did it, not who else but. You don't get to exclude. You have to include evidence to prove and make sure you answer every question but that. So it's more than that. And yet, these are human beings. And one of the things that you and I do as prosecutors, as defense attorneys, as part of this system, is we drive people. And we drive people a lot of different ways. And your mentor was a master at shifting the burden and saying, who else but? And that can drive people, especially when they look in the faces of these grieving victims and say, we want to give you justice. I'm not saying they got it wrong. I'm saying this is one of those really strange places when we watch how the system can be manipulated, sometimes fairly, sometimes rightly, sometimes in questionable ways, in my opinion. And that's one of the reasons as defense attorneys, we need to have our antenna up all the time, because that's one of the best things that prosecutors have. That's one of the tools they use, is to say, well, who else could have done it? And my response is objection, may we approach. And usually I would like to do that beforehand to shut them down before they even start. Because I'll climb up over the desk and I'll climb on top of the prosecutor and wrap my hands around his mouth to say, you don't get to. Bad prosecutor, bad prosecutor.
Well, they got away with it here. You weren't in the courtroom to stop him, Jack, and they've both been convicted. Like I said, sentencing is set for August 21st in the case that's been 10 years in the making. So
I'm not saying they were wrong.
Right. No, I get it. Let's turn finally to Manhattan, New York, where last week also saw the conclusion of another high-profile case with Sean Diddy Combs' acquittal on the most serious charges in the mogul's federal sex trafficking trial. After prosecutors presented 35 witnesses through 29 days of testimony, Combs' defense presented no witnesses of their own, and the entrepreneur did not take the stand. However, the jury reached a split verdict, finding Combs guilty on 2 prostitution-related charges, but in a massive win for the defense, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking and racketeering charges, which would have carried heavy prison time. Combs faces a maximum of 10 years behind bars for each of the prostitution-related charges. He is scheduled to face sentencing on October 3rd, and Judge Arun Subramanian denied Combs bail, keeping the bad boy founder behind bars for the immediate future. Jack, in my view, it is unfair to say split verdict. It is unfair to say conviction. To me, this is an out-and-out win for the defense. I don't care if he's going to serve more prison time with what he was looking at, but what was your reaction? Were you surprised by this?
Prosecutors screwed up.
Yeah.
Prosecutors screwed up big time. And they screwed up big time before this trial ever started. I mean, this is one of the problems in some cases. You can charge almost anybody with anything if you want.
Right.
And I hate this charge. This racketeering charge in particular, I hate. Because we got to think about what it's designed for. It's to go after the mob.
Right.
And the reason prosecutors like it, federal prosecutors like it so much, is what they try to do is they try to say, you're not just responsible, Mr. Defendant, for every bad act that you commit. You're responsible for every bad act that may have been committed by anybody else that we can wrap around your neck and squeeze. That's really the difference. And so what you get here is that collective, you should be, as a defense attorney, I'm responsible for every bad thing that I do. I think that's true. But am I responsible for every bad thing that everybody else does who is near me, who is around me, who may come across me? I'm responsible for my bad acts. And the problem here is that this wasn't about this bad boy and Bad Boy Records and his empire. This was about his freak-offs. This was about a guy who had a kink. And the kink was a certain thing that he was into. Not because his empire was into it, he was into it. Hence, the guilty verdicts on the prostitution, that's the kink. The thing is what they missed on was the sex trafficking, because that's not what this was. This wasn't the racketeering, because this wasn't about the organization. Oh, and by the way, if you're going to argue an organization, you probably, not that you have to, you probably should start charging 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 people around him, right, and then start pinning it around them too. And they all work for him, and you create at the end a nice big pyramid schematic. And you lay it out and you say, see, ladies and gentlemen, this was an organization designed not just to support the kink, but to support the organization's driving of this whole process. They did not do it. They screwed it up at the beginning. They screwed it up as they continued to drive it down the pike, and they should have lost, and people should be outraged because it cost millions of dollars to prosecute this guy. And I'm not a fan of him, but that's a fact, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, and you aren't alone. And it is, you make an excellent point, where I was surprised we did not hear from his close right-hand men and women henchmen. Where were all the people who are, receiving some sort of deal from the government so that they can testify and say, yeah, this was a criminal enterprise. He had us going out and doing this. We knew we were committing crimes. Yeah, it was to serve his sexual desires and wants and everything else, but it was also about power. It was also about, money, all of that other kind of, never heard from those people. And so the question I kept on saying, and I thought this was just worked out so perfectly from an ironic perspective, is that was in federal court in Manhattan. Well, just down the street in the state court in Manhattan, Harvey Weinstein was on trial for having done very much the same things under very similar circumstances, and he's being charged in state court, and it's not a RICO case. So why is Sean Combs RICO, and like you said, the mob and a criminal enterprise, and Harvey Weinstein is not? If what is true of Sean Combs, as far as the RICO statute is concerned, you would think would be just as true for Harvey Weinstein. And if that is true, then it's going to be true for a lot of other people. And now we really are talking about overextending that charge altogether. I agree with you. I think they overshot this thing tremendously, which is shocking to me from the perspective of the feds don't usually do that. They usually keep their powder dry for the most part and are very cautious about bringing down, especially somebody of this high notoriety. Where do you think things went wrong there? I mean, did they just get too? Was the idea of putting that prize trophy on their wall just too much of a temptation for them?
R. Kelly. That's where it came from. When you turn around and you look at R. Kelly and you take a look at how successful the feds were, by the way, understand just how bad off that guy is, not just in the federal prosecutions, multiple state prosecutions as well. And everybody wants a piece of him. And if we look at how successful they were at using RICO, at how successful they were at using racketeering, you can see why they would have used it in I'll use the term similar case. And it feels similar. But what's extraordinary, and we take a look at what it was that he was actually convicted of. And you're right. Let's look at Harvey for a second. Let's make that comparison for a second. I mean, what did he really do? He moved adult prostitutes across state lines. That was it. That was all that he did. Everybody else seemed to be involved. I mean, does he use his authority, his position of authority, his influence? Doesn't everybody? I'm being honest. I mean, the thing is, that's what all of these guys do. Anybody who was in this position as a pimp would do that. That's what they do. That's a part of the nature of the criminal charge. And when we look at what happens when you start overreaching, my concern sometimes is that the feds step in cases because they think they can. My concern is that I don't think in some cases they should. There's a lot of cases where you would say, is this the situation where the feds should step in? Is this the case where they shouldn't step in? Dare I go slightly off topic? There was an assassination of the Speaker of the House here in Minnesota, where I am right now, frankly, less than a half a mile from my office. And she was assassinated along with her husband by a man who's been charged. The feds stepped in on that case, and technically they could seek the death penalty if they chose to do so. And the question is do you let the feds do this, or do you let the state do this? And there's reasons to do both. I just think the feds have to really be careful and think about when they step in. And maybe that's one of the reasons, because there's a political aspect to it. But there are some times when I don't think it's necessary for the feds to step in. And New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania could easily have done that prosecution. California could easily have done that prosecution if they chose to do so. I'm thinking specifically about the thing that did tank him, Diddy, and that was that crazy video of him at the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles. I mean, come on. We saw it 1,000 times, and so did the jury.
Yeah. And I think that's what probably frustrates people most who are not in the weeds legally as to what was happening here with the government. And they think that he got away with that, when it's not really that he got away with that. He wasn't entirely charged with that. And what he was charged with, they just couldn't put it together in front of a jury in a way that they could wrap their heads around.
They didn't charge him with assault.
Right.
You know, I mean, they could have. You could have said he was trying to kill her. If you want to make that argument, well, then make it.
No.
Make the argument and charge him with attempted murder if that's what you want to do. They didn't do that.
Jack, it is always a pleasure hearing your thoughts. It's always a treat. Thank you so much for coming on this week. Before I let you go, where can people find out more about you?
Nah, I don't want to talk about me. I want to talk about you, man. I see what you're doing right now. It's amazing. And watching you from afar, there's a lot of us out here who are huge fans, and we're thrilled. And the acknowledgement is completely well-deserved. And frankly, they're smart to have somebody of your caliber who can actually talk about what it's like in the trenches. So when you're talking, people should be listening. That's it.
You're very kind, sir. Right back at you. It's a mutual appreciation committee over here. So thank you very much again for sharing our thoughts with us. You always put things in a way that has me thinking for a long time afterwards. So I appreciate that. I'm your host, Josh Ritter. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Joshua Ritter ESQ. And if you want to hear my thoughts and coverage on even more true crime cases, you can check out my brand new YouTube channel, Courtroom Confidential. And of course, you can find all of our Sidebar episodes wherever you get your podcasts. And we would love to hear from you. If you've got questions or comments you'd like us to address, please tweet us your questions with the hashtag TCN Sidebar. And thank you again for joining us at the True Crime News Sidebar.